Part 1. The dust of time, all that was ever built, eventually fades, but amidst the ashes of history, there remain whispers. Imagine you are standing in a barren plain, wind whipping sand across the cracked earth, where the heart of a glorious civilization once beat. There are no more voices, no more lights, only rubble, fallen statues, and the whispers of time. I am an archaeologist, a traveler in history. My work is not merely to measure artifacts, but to listen to what has been forgotten. Beneath every layer of earth and stone lies an untold story, and I, along with you, are embarking on that journey. A journey that spans millennia, crossing mountains, seas, and the fissures in human memory. History is not just a sequence of wars and kings. It is the breath of ordinary people. It is the laughter of children in a city swallowed by the jungle. It is the dream of a stone carver who poured his soul into a bas-relief. It is the final prayer before a flood submerged a world. And sometimes, it is the silent sob of a civilization as it collapses. We will begin in Mesopotamia, the land between two rivers, where humanity built its first cities, wrote its first words, and where the first collapse on a grand scale occurred. Sumer, the name echoes like an ancient song. The Sumerians, around 3000 BC, transformed this wetland into an empire of ziggurat temples, soaring amidst the desert. They etched upon the world a language cut directly into clay cuneiform. The banners, the statues of gods, the tablets recording quantities of grain and beer, all of it remains sleeping beneath the soil for thousands of years. I once held such a clay tablet in my hands. It wasn't heavy, nor large, just the size of my palm. But that feeling, it was as if I were holding a message sent from millennia ago. We lived, we loved, and this is how we remembered it. But then, what happened? That question I carry with me on every journey. Why did a civilization that boasted cities like your Uruk and Eridu, with libraries, irrigation systems, and gods worshipped with absolute reverence, vanish? Part of the answer lies in the very things they created. The Tigris and Euphrates rivers, the two lifebloods of this land, brought both life and ruin. The soil grew increasingly saline from the irrigation that failed to drain the salt away. Prolonged droughts set in. Farmers abandoned their fields. Inhabitants left the cities. And war, as always, lurked in the shadows. I don't just look at ancient climate maps, see the collapsed roofs where evening meals were once shared. I see the mass graves, evidence of conflict and famine. I see the last lines of writing on clay, growing scarcer and scarcer until they stop, like a heart that has ceased to beat. But this is not just a story of collapse. It is a story of the survival instinct, of the struggle to hold on to the light even as the storm rages. The Sumerians did not disappear in a day. They gradually gave way to the Akkadians, then the Babylonians. Their language lived on in religious texts, in the Epic of Gilgamesh, the world's oldest heroic epic. They died, but they left a deep footprint in the memory of humankind. I wonder, when a civilization is lost, what truly remains? Like statues, texts, or memory? If no one is left to tell the tale, did it ever truly exist? We know of Sumer not because they were victorious, but because they left something behind. What they carved into clay has withstood time. I stand in the city of Urur, its ruins under the pale blue sky of Iraq. The wind blows through the low walls, across thousands of years, and I imagine a Sumerian mother singing her child to sleep. A priest ascending the ziggurat at dawn, a nameless poet, writing the first story of a king who sought immortality. They are still here, buried in stone, sleeping beneath the sand. And I, a visitor from millennia later, can only listen. If you are ready, I will take you to the next place. A world that once glittered in the deep jungles of Southeast Asia. The Khmer Empire. Part 2. Khmer. The builders of stone and water. Some cities are buried by sand. Some empires are swallowed by the jungle. Sometimes it is in their very disappearance that we truly understand their greatness. As the plain banks over a sea of leaves, the tropical jungle unfolds below like an endless tapestry, deep green, dense, seemingly impenetrable. But then, something emerges. The square outlines of stone, spire rising from the earth. It's an ancient tree growing through the roof of a temple. and I know I have arrived. Angkor. Nowhere else in the world have I felt so small, yet so welcomed. In the heart of modern Cambodia, amidst nature teeming with life, lie the ruins of a civilization that once redefined an era with stone, water, and a fervent belief in immortality. The Khmer Empire was not just an empire. It was a declaration. Humanity could master nature itself, if it had the will. People often remember Angkor Wat, the world's largest Hindu temple, as the symbol of the Khmer. But Angkor is merely the tip of the iceberg of a far more complex world. System of canals, reservoirs, great dams, and urban planning covered hundreds of square kilometers. A colossal hydraulic city built, not with steel and concrete, but with laterite, wood, and the steadfast determination of hundreds of thousands of people. I once walked along one of those ancient canals. Trees now cover its banks, and the water is but a trickle. But the stacked stones are still there, as resilient as the spirit of those who built it. A current of water once flowed through here, bringing life to millions. The Khmer Empire understood this well. He who controls the water controls life. They built enormous reservoirs, barees like man-made oceans. They reflected the sky, cooled the climate, and stored water for the harsh, dry season. I imagine an ancient engineer watching water pour into a canal, light glinting on the surface of the reservoir, his heart filled with pride. So why? Did such a monumental creation, such an advanced civilization vanish? The answer is not simple, and perhaps not entirely conclusive. One cause was nature. When you live with the jungle, you must compromise. When you become overconfident in your ability to tame it, you pay the price. Climate change of that era, prolonged droughts followed by extreme monsoons, fractured the Khmer's hydraulic system. The great reservoirs dried up, the canals collapsed. But there were other, more man-made causes. Constant wars with Dai Viet and Siam, internal power struggles among kings, shift in religion, from Hinduism to Mahayana Buddhism, and then back again. Each change brought demolition, new construction, and the modification of temples. The Khmer were too busy rebuilding their temples to remember to repair their canals. I once stood before Bayan, the enigmatic temple of stone faces, with hundreds of smiling visages looking down upon the world. Each face is like a soul, a memory. Perhaps this was the Khmer's way of preserving their presence not through victory, but through an eternal gaze. But in the end, time did not smile back. The city was gradually abandoned. The jungle began its encroachment. Stone-paved roads were broken by tree roots. The people left, taking their memories with them. The jungle closed in like a door, keeping the secret of an empire that once reigned here. Centuries later, when the French first rediscovered Angkor, they thought they were the first to set foot there. But no, the local Cambodian people had never forgotten. They called it the City of the Ancestors, and its temples had been visited in silence for all those years. I walk through Ta Prohm, where the roots of ancient trees wrap around the temple walls like giant serpents. Amidst the dappled sunlight, I feel something clearly. The Khmer never vanished. They are merely sleeping. Perhaps collapse is never the end. It is a process of transformation. Angkor was not destroyed. It was embraced by nature. Tree and stone merged. Man and jungle breathed as one. An Aja, spectator standing between two worlds, can only bow my head and listen to the whispers from the roots. Now, follow me. We will leave this jungle, cross the ocean, to a remote island in the middle of the Pacific. A place the world once thought was a myth, Rapa Nui, Easter Island. Part 3, Rapa Nui. The carvers of stone and silence at the far edge of the ocean. Civilization tried to reach for the sky. With stone, not everyone knows what Rapa Nui is. But mention the Moai statues, those long faces with hollow eyes, staring out at the blue sea, and everyone recognizes them. They become a symbol of mystery. But the greater wonder lies not in the statues themselves, but in the question: who raised them, and why did they stop? I once arrived on this island on a misty morning. As the ship docked, all I could see were rocks and grass. But when I stepped onto the land, there was a silence as thick as the mist that shrouded it. a unique feeling as if this place held a secret that only time could understand. Rapa Nui, or Easter Island, is a tiny, isolated in the vast ocean. So remote that when you stand in the middle of the island, you are more than 2,000 kilometers from the nearest continent. That is precisely what makes the story here so incredible. Over 1,000 years ago, the Polynesians' brave seafarers sailed across the ocean and reached this place. They didn't just find a new land to inhabit, they transformed it into a world of their own, a complex, organized society with religion, hierarchy, and a belief in carving stone as a way to preserve the spirits of their ancestors. The Moai giant stone statues, ranging from 2 to over 10 meters tall and weighing tens of tons, were not meant to honor gods. They were the embodiment of ancestors. The Rapa Nui people believed the spirits of the dead could protect their descendants if remembered through ceremony. And the Moai were the stone vessels for that ritual. They carved them directly from the slopes of the Rano Raraku volcano, then transported them for kilometers over hills and mountains to be erected along the coastline. There were no wheels, no draft animals, only human hands and ingenuity. Some theories suggest they walked the statues, using ropes to rock them back and forth to move them forward, as if the statues were taking steps. I once stood at the foot of a fallen Moai, half buried in the earth, and imagined the scene. Dozens of people chanting, pulling ropes, adjusting every tiny movement, dragging it for kilometers, just to bring a stone face to its designated place. Why did they do it? Perhaps because humans always need to feel connected to something larger than themselves, the past, their ancestors, the cosmos. And when they had no writing, no paper, they wrote with stone. When they had no more myths to tell, they told stories through wordless faces. So, what happened? Why did a society with such organization and capability suddenly decline? Part of the reason, tragically, may have been their own ambition. The Moai grew bigger, taller, and were moved farther. The number of statues increased rapidly. They needed wood for tools, for rollers, for houses, and the forests began to disappear. When the forests vanished, the soil eroded. With the loss of soil came a shortage of food. The population grew beyond what the island could sustain. Wars began to break out, not for land, but for food. The Moai were no longer raised. They were toppled. As some oral traditions recall, we once erected the statues, and then with our own hands we pushed them down. The collapse of Rapa Nui wasn't a thunderous event like a battle. It was a growing silence. It was when the festival stopped. It was when the last stone was left on the hillside, never to be moved. It was when night fell and there were no more ceremonial fires. Then visitors from the west arrived. They brought guns, disease, and exploitation. They captured the Rapa Nui people for the slave trade, stealing away an entire generation. The survivors no longer clearly remembered why their ancestors had once raised the statues, and so the story fell into oblivion. I once sat under the moonlight at Ahu Tongariki where 15 Moai stand in a straight line. Before me was the sea, behind me, the sky, and the statues still stood there, hundreds of years after their civilization had collapsed. They are silent, but they are not absent. Rapa Nui taught me something. Greatness lies not only in the building, but also in the surviving amidst the desolation. They were a people with no metal, no wheels, no traditional written language, but they carved stone, and the stone remains. We have seen a civilization rise from the mud of the Tigris, vanish into the jungles of Angkor, and fade into silence in the middle of the South Pacific. But now, I want you to follow me. We will cross the Andes to a city in the clouds, a city that was once hidden Machu Picchu, the Inca Empire. Part 5. Nazca. The artists who drew on the sand for the sky sometimes. To understand a civilization, we shouldn't look from the ground, but from the sky. Flying over the southern desert of Peru, through the window of a small plane, I saw the first one. A giant bird, its wingspan stretching hundreds of meters. Curved with the sand, its head reaching for the horizon. Then came a spider, a monkey, a strange spiral. All were carved into the earth as if exclusively for the gods above, or not meant for humans on the ground. It can only be truly seen when you fly. Nazca. No one knows for sure why they drew on the desert. But over 1,000 years ago, Between approximately 200 BC and 800 AD, the Nazca people left behind hundreds of giant drawings-glyphs on the arid land. They had no airplanes. They had no satellites. But they had something more important: the will to make the heavens themselves look down upon them. I once walked along one of the lines of straight path, stretching out like an ancient laser beam, and the feeling was strange. There were no signs of heavy tools, no walls. It was simply the ground, with its top layer of red pebbles scraped away to reveal the lighter sand beneath. A simple technique, yet it was the absolute aridity of this desert that preserved them for over a millennium. But the Nazca didn't just draw, they lived. They were the cultural descendants of the Paracas people, who practiced mummification and sewed textiles with a sophistication that surpassed even the weaving techniques of medieval Europe. They were masters of hydraulic engineering, digging deep wells called puquios, with spiral structures to tap into underground water. In a land where rain might not fall for an entire year, they found a way to farm, to survive. I have leaned over the mouth of a puqueos wella, cool wind blowing from within, as if from another era. An underground construction, yet a symbol of human persistence in the face of the impossible. And then the question arises again: why did they collapse? There are many theories, and none are entirely complete. Perhaps it was climate change, prolonged droughts that caused even the puqueos to run dry. Perhaps it was unusual floods from the El Niño phenomenon, devastating their fragile agricultural system. Or perhaps, like so many times before, it was internal conflict. I once saw a Nazca skull during an excavation. It had a hole in it, the mark of trepanation, an ancient form of skull drilling that could be used for medical treatment, punishment. Could it be that they too fought, tortured, and suffered, right beneath the sacred drawings they offered to the sky? But there is something strange about the Nazca. Though the culture vanished, the drawings remain. They do not speak. They do not condemn. They do not narrate. They are simply there, waiting for someone to understand. And that makes me think, did they draw to be understood, or simply to be remembered? One Nazca legend tells that the drawings are star maps, messages sent to the cosmos. Another theory suggests they were part of rain-making rituals or ceremonial religious paths. And perhaps, none of us are truly qualified to say for sure, but I know this: no one carves a 100-meter-long monkey into the desert for no reason. No one moved stone, channeled water, tied knots, or dug wells for centuries if they didn't believe in something immense. They may have collapsed. But if collapsing still leaves behind a trace visible from space, then it is no longer death. It is an exclamation point in the middle of the desert. I stood among those lines as evening fell, and the wind blew like a message from those who once lived here. No one spoke, but in my heart, I heard them. We were here. We carved into the earth something that no one can erase. The journey is not over, and we will head north, crossing deserts, over mountains, and through jungles too. A civilization that once defeated even the Spanish, at least for a moment. The Aztec, the warriors of the sun. Part 4. Inca. The builders in the clouds. Some civilizations chose the sea to expand. Some relied on rivers to survive. But there were also empires that rose up to the sky to befriend the clouds. I still remember the first moment I stood amidst Machu Picchu. Gray stone walls emerged through a thin veil of mist, like a dream revealing a fragment of its truth. Before me were neatly laid stone terraces, embracing the mountainside. Each slab, as large as an adult, was fitted together without mortar, without a single gap. Below me was a deep abyss, above the sky and clouds, and I thought, how could humans have built this, in a place like this? The Inca were not an ancient civilization like the Sumerians or the Egyptians. In fact, chronologically, they were latecomers. When the Inca Empire reached its zenith in the 15th century, the Renaissance was already underway in Europe. But despite their late arrival, the Inca built an astonishingly vast empire, stretching nearly 4,000 kilometers along the Andes. From modern-day Colombia down to Chile, a land encompassing mountains, jungles, deserts, and valleys. And within this realm, the Inca didn't just survive, they orchestrated. They planned. They connected it all through a system that even today is hard to imagine. No wheels, no currency, no traditional written language. But they had something else. They had roads. The Inca Trail network, spanning over 40,000 kilometers, linked every region of the empire. Messengers chasquirin continuously from one station to the next, relaying information using quipu, knotted cords used to encode data. I once saw a real quipu in a museum, dozens of strings hanging down, each knot representing a number, a message. It seemed to say, we don't need paper to remember. We remember with our hands. Machu Picchu, contrary to popular belief, is not the capital of the Inca. It was a sacred site, perhaps a royal retreat, an astronomical observatory, or a place for holy mountain ceremonies. But more than its function, Machu Picchu is a symbol of how the Inca integrated with nature without subjugating it. They did not level the mountains, they embraced them. Each terrace was a tiered field, preserving soil, water, and crops. Each stone was an answer to gravity and earthquakes. There were no concrete foundations, only a profound understanding of earth, water, and sky. So what caused this empire to collapse? It was a story both swift and violent. A storm that came from the ocean. The Spanish. In 1532, just a few hundred soldiers under the command of Francisco Pizarro landed in Inca territory. They arrived at the worst possible time, when the empire had just concluded a brutal civil war of succession. Two princes vying for the throne, Huáscar and Atahualpa, had torn the once solid internal structure apart. Pizarro did not win through military might, he won through strategy. By taking Atahualpa hostage and then executing him even after receiving a massive ransom. That cruelty cut off the head of the serpent, and then, piece by piece, the body of the Inca, fell. I have walked on the stones of Cuscotha, ancient Inca capital, where the original foundation stones still lie silent, even as later Spanish structures were built on top of them. They speak of something profound. The Inca never truly disappeared. They were conquered. But their roots remain firmly planted in the earth. The Quechua language lives on, customs are still preserved. And in the eyes of the elders in the high Andes, you can still see the gaze of a people who once built an empire in the clouds. The fall of the Inca is proof that it is not only nature that can destroy an empire. Sometimes the unexpected arrival of an outsider, combined with internal fissures, is enough to bring down a giant. But what did the Inca leave behind? The trails remain. The stone walls still stand, and their story is now a part of human memory. Not because they were perfect, but because they once dreamed of building a paradise, not in the heavens, but in the clouds. Now, I invite you to return to the desert, a land where people carved images into the earth, so that the gods in the sky could see them. Nazca, the drawings not meant for human eyes.